July 2010, I remember it vividly. I was the number 2 man in a 7-man element making entry into a building with shots being fired. Breacher came up, took the door, flashbang was deployed. I remember the sight, the sound, the concussion. We pushed in fast, made a hard left in the first room, counted a suspect at about 15 feet. We split, we both engaged him, suspect went down, point man owned the suspect. We pushed on. We could hear girls screaming as we came to the next threshold, went through that door. It was a shallow room. Screaming was louder. Went through the following door. As soon as I came through, I was in point position now. I could see the hostage taker who had 2 females, and the only aspect of him we could see was a gun sticking out through him. So as I angled off to get a shot, I remember 2 flashes, the rounds hitting me in my upper left chest. Once I had my shot, I raised my AR, put 2 rounds directly to his face. Suspect went down. Hostages were okay. Luckily, this was a training scenario. But did this prepare our team for 2 deadly encounters we would have in the next couple years and the many we would have after that? Absolutely. And are we training to that level in the fire service? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Training like SWAT. What we can learn from the SWAT teams, and the mindsets, the training they do in the United States. So my name is Ryan Scellick. I'm a training captain at Pasco Fire in Tri-Cities, Washington. Spent 5 years as a commissioned SWAT officer in a busy team also in Washington State. There's our website. If you have questions, comments, or want to send us hate mail, that's how you can get a hold of us. So what does SWAT do different? Something called OODA loop, something called Cooper's Colors of Awareness, identification of training scars, mental preparation, stress inoculation, and a standard of exceptionalism and mastery. So OODA loop, not hula hoop, as some of the comedians on my department like to refer to it. So OODA loop was created by Colonel John Boyd in the 1950s, and he was an Air Force colonel who trained fighter pilots. And Colonel Boyd theorizes that the reason that we had a 10-to-1 kill ratio over the faster, more agile MiG was because our pilots understood and could move through their OODA loop faster. So he created this OODA loop as a guideline for decision-making in critical situations. So OODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. So observe is when we get an outside stimulus, so we see something, we hear something, we orient to it. Orientation is really the key component of it. It's when we accept or deny the stimulus. So we've all heard the stories of people who've been in active shooter situations who said, I thought I was hearing firecrackers going off. Their mind was not allowing them to believe that they were in a situation where there was gunfire going off. We hear about it with line of duty deaths or Mayday situations where people waited way too long. They're not orienting the situation, believing that they're actually lost, they're trapped, they're in trouble. So once we've oriented to it, then we make a decision. So we make a decision based on recognition prime decision making, or RPD, that slide tray we build in our head of things we've seen before. The more slides we have, the faster we can decide. And then lastly, we act. We make the decision, and then we do it. So we perform that skill that we've trained over and over again. If we have to think about it, again, it slows down our OODA loop. So you can see how if you get hung up on any part of the OODA loop, your decision making is slower, your actions are slower. So it's about moving through your OODA loop really fast. And law enforcement uses this in a couple of ways. The first is disrupting a suspect's OODA loop. So flashbangs is one of them. We overwhelm their senses. Everybody's familiar with the term shoot and move, shoot and move. It's all about disrupting their OODA loop. The other way they use it is the same way fighter pilots do, is moving through it rapidly. So if I'm engaged in a verbal conflict with a suspect and I see them display the pre-fight indicators, they clench their fist, clench their jaw, shift their weight, I know they're going to assault me. The faster I recognize that, move through my OODA loop, decides I have to go hands-on, the more successful of an outcome it's going to be for me. So that's how law enforcement's using the OODA loop concept. So Cooper's colors. Lieutenant Colonel John Cooper, the Marine Corps, came up with this concept that pairs your psychological and your physiological response to stressful environments. So, and then he put it into a color paradigm. So he kind of started this, and then was taken over by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. So if you're not familiar with him, he's a well-renowned author, many books out there. He was a ranger and then a psychology professor at West Point. So he travels around and teaches SWAT officers, military officers, on the psychology of training and deadly conflict. And a lot of the stuff is from his research, his writing. He's probably the foremost leading researcher on combat science. So a lot of the stuff is from his findings. So the colors. First is white, a mental state of relaxation, blissful to your environment. When you're at the grocery store and you're walking down the aisle and you're trying to get by somebody and you're so close to them you can breathe on them and they don't know you're there, and everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? They are in condition white. We as firefighters and law enforcement, we don't really live in condition white unless we are asleep or at home in our recliners. We just don't. It's not in our personality. Not to say that some couldn't, but it's pretty blissfully aware. It's white is psychological more than physiological. So then we transition to yellow. Yellow is a heightened state of awareness. Again, more psychological than physiological. Our heart rate is less than 115, but this is where we typically live in our day-to-day environment. When you're at the mall and you're looking, where's my fire exits? When you're noticing somebody who's digging into a bag suspiciously, you're in condition yellow. When you finish a 24-hour shift where you slept all night and you're exhausted the next day, it's probably because you were operating in condition yellow for the entire shift, waiting for that emergency call to come in, waiting for that next thing to happen. That's condition yellow. So we typically are in this a lot. And in yellow, we have good cognitive abilities. We have good fine motor skills. So pilots will actually take a yellow dot and put on their instrument cluster to remind them they need to stay in condition yellow, because obviously they need cognitive ability and they need good fine motor skills. So for incident commanders, people that are out there at that 10,000 foot view, it's really critical that they stay in condition yellow because they need that cognitive ability. For those of us that are going to be going in and fighting the fire, dealing with some sort of stressful situation, probably going to be in condition red. So condition red, we start seeing our heart rate increase, get that hormonal-induced tachycardia to whatever stimulus it is, a fire, a rescue, a mayday, a known victim. Any of those things are going to jump our heart rate right up in condition red. We're going to get a release of catecholamines, the epi, norepi, that type of stuff. And when that happens, we start to lose our fine motor skills, and we start to switch from our prefrontal cortex to our animal brain, our midbrain, and so we rely more on the skills we've trained on. So the saying of, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your training, is not a saying, it's actually science. You're going to fall to your animal midbrain, the things that you have trained over and over and over when you start moving into the condition red and gray and black, which we'll talk about. So the downside is we start losing fine motor skills. The upside is we have optimal survival combat performance. So for us, when we're doing gross motor skill type things, it's fine to be in condition red as long as we can operate at that level, as long as we're training at that level in condition red. So gray, again, this is an addition by Colonel Grossman. So they found that this was only achieved by highly skilled operators, people that were very proficient their skill set. When other people were going into condition black, they were going into condition, or staying in condition gray. They were still really effective in their skill sets. So if we're highly trained, we don't have to think about our skills, then we can operate in condition gray. We do have further loss of fine motor skills. We start to see some of that tunnel vision. And so in law enforcement, they really focus on training, so we're using gross motor skills, and we're taking time to take a breath, be aware of our environment, because we understand that we are always going to have tunnel vision. Condition black, again, a Grossman additive. Overstressed, too much stimulus, we start losing all cognitive ability. We've all heard radio traffic of incident commanders who are in condition black. They're not processing information anymore. If you've listened to active shooter events where incident commanders were struggling, you may have heard traffic where they're on the seaside saying, we've got multiple gunshot victims, we need 3 medic units to the seaside of the building. And the incident commander repeats that back, but he never sends anybody. He's repeating the information he already knows because he's not able to make cognitive thought. So we need to be able to recognize when ourselves or when other people are in condition black and make sure that we're bringing them out of it, especially our young people. If you haven't been exposed to a stimulus, the likelihood of going into condition black increases. So how do we ingrain these midbrain skills in training? There's people that are far more advanced in this concept than I am. If you look up Rick George, some of his stuff, they started using burn barrels to introduce smell before you do a training evolution. And the reason they're doing that is because they're activating the amygdala. So the amygdala is that animal midbrain, and the only sense that's tied to the amygdala is smell. So there's 3 ways that we can really increase our training evolutions. So the amygdala activation that like Rick George is doing, and then we add stress and we add sensory engagement. So we increase the complexity of training. Again, this is not when we're teaching a new person a skill. This is when we're transitioning from learning a skill to being proficient at a skill to now mastery. Is we want to induce stress. We want to make it more difficult, more challenging, overload the senses, because that's how it's going to be in the real world on your worst day. Training scars. So law enforcement. Pre-1990s, everybody was shooting revolvers, right? So one of the things they were doing on the range is they would empty their weapon, take the brass, put it in their hand, put the brass in their pockets, because they didn't want to pick up brass at the end of the day. What they found was that law enforcement officers were getting in gunfights and taking the time to put brass in their hands, in their pockets, because that's what they had done over and over and over again. Colonel Grossman talks about gun grabs. So an officer, he had practiced gun grabs over and over again. Grabs the gun, hands it back, grabs the gun, hands it back. Unfortunately, he was actually involved in a robbery, and he had a gun pulled on him. He grabbed it and handed it back, because that's what he had done over and over and over again. He had trained it into his midbrain, his animal brain. So what are we doing? Half-bail hose operations, right? We get lazy. We're out on the training ground. We don't really want to use good form, so we do half-bail. So when you're on your worst day, when you're in condition red, condition gray, condition black, are you going to have that muscle memory to go all the way, or are you going to do half-bail? Masks removed. How many of us have plugged in a mask, forgot to turn the bottle on, suck it to our face, and then the first thing we do is rip it off? Is that the only way you've ever trained to do mask failure drill? Do you have a system? Check to make sure it's seated, check my bypass, check to make sure my air is on. Are you practicing that system? If you're not, guaranteed if you go on a fire tomorrow, you'll do what you've done before. And if that's rip your mask off, that's what's going to happen in the real world. Don't put the training fire out. Guilty of this as an instructor. Got to get the evolutions in. For those of us, for training officers and chiefs who are concerned about melting Velcro and leaving black on helmets because we're getting fires too hot, we're not doing realistic training, we're going to get people hurt. So we cannot put those training scars in there. We have to fight fire the way we really would in a fire. We can't knock it back and then say, all right, in the real world, we'd really put this thing out. We can't do that. We are ingraining skills into our mind that will come up on our worst day. Mental preparation. So a lot of ways we can do this. Stress inoculation is a big one. Again, if we're seeing these things in training, if we're preparing for those worst day evolutions, when it really happens, we've been inoculated to it. If it's not in your slideshow on your worst day, you're going to be looking for a slide that's not there. So positive outcome training evolutions, guilty of this one as well. How many times are we doing Mayday drills where we're running people out of air and killing them? They ran out of air, you died, pulled your mask off. We should not be doing that. Law enforcement learned this lesson a long time ago. They used to do the bang, bang, you're dead. They quit doing that because they were training officers to go down when they were shot. So now, even with simunitions, you're hit 3, 4, 5 times. You're not out of the fight, not allowed to die in my training evolution. Square yourself away. Once it's appropriate, the instructor pulls you out. Give yourself self-aid. Get yourself back in the fight. You're not allowed to die in my training evolution, and we need to be doing the same thing. Survival mindset. Something law enforcement officers are doing, I don't think a lot of us firefighters are, is running these evolutions through our mind before shift. That worst day, the lunar evolution, the I'm lost, I'm trapped, my partner's gone, my radio's failed. We can run through these things sitting in our bedroom 10 minutes before our shift, and if it happens that day, you've already built slides for it. They've proven this through professional coaching. Athletes are doing this. We should be doing this too. Exceptionalism and mastery. So this was my former team. I would venture to say they look pretty good at what they do, and they are. They are pretty exceptional. What does it take to be on a SWAT team? What makes them exceptional? How do they get to an exceptional level? So you're looking at 20 to 30 hours a month of training, 2,000 to 3,000 rounds discharged through their weapons, quarterly physical agility training, quarterly weapons qualification to a standard that's 20% higher than regular patrol. There's no, I didn't make it this month, I didn't make it this quarter, I came up short. You either made it or you didn't. There's no mediocrity in a SWAT team. And yes, we can't have that in our companies. We can't say, hey, you didn't pull your line fast enough this month, sorry, you're cut. Can't do that. But what we can do is we can create standards. Just because we're not kicking people off of our companies doesn't mean we can't set a standard and achieve it, right? We set the standard and we meet it every month, every quarter, whatever it is, and we do what we got to do to get the lowest common denominator up to that standard. We got to have standards to be exceptional. So how do we improve? OODA loop, understand it, interrupt it in training. So brothers in battles, they throw babies out of windows. If the first time you ever see a baby being thrown out of a window is when you've already had your mindset and put in a ladder to floor 2, your OODA loop is going to be completely disrupted and you're going to be very slow to adapt to the fact that somebody is actually throwing a baby out of a window. We have to be interrupting training with things that are even improbable. Anything that just takes us out of our OODA loop. And we see this in training. You get focused in. I'm VESing on this on floor 2. And there can be something going on right over here, but my tunnel vision is dialed in, and I'm set on doing that VES evolution. This is where, as instructors, we have to interrupt those things. We have to throw things out there that are going to trip people up, take them off their game, and make them make decisions when it's critical time. Cooper's colors, know your triggers, and understand tactical breathing. So the only way that we can really get ourselves down to a yellow from a red, a gray, a black is through tactical breathing. Again, back to Rick George, look at some of his stuff, Riley breathing technique, 4-box breathing. That's how we take our heart rate down and put our frontal brain back in the game and start making cognitive thoughts again. Training scars, train like we fight. This is something that you have to do yourself. You can't ask your training officer, your captain, how am I creating training scars? If you're doing half bale hose evolutions, you're the only one that knows it. If you're throwing ladders and you're not doing it in an SCBA with your mask hanging off and irons in your hand and your tick in this hand, when it's 3 o'clock in the morning on uneven ground and there's a known rescue and all these things that are always hanging you up, you didn't find out until that time, it's not going to go well. We have to train like we fight. Mental preparation, again, doing that mental envisioning before shift of things going right and things going wrong, nailing that rescue evolution, nailing that stretch to the door, nailing that my SCBA failed and this is how I worked through it because I've envisioned it over and over again. Exceptionalism and mastery, performance without thought. We have to get good at skills so there is no thought to it. If there's a rescue behind a door, we got a mayday, and we got to force this door, and I'm asking myself on an outward swinging metal door, if forks or adds go in first, I'm not going to be successful. If I have to think about it, and I'm in condition red or gray or black, I'm not going to be successful. It has to be automatic. Last thing I'll leave you with is a story about Deputy Jennifer Fulford. She's from Florida. 3-year patrol officer. She responded to a report of a 8-year-old girl who was in a van with her 2 younger siblings. Mom was inside with 3 robbers. Deputy Fulford pulls up. There's officers congregated in the front yard. They start formulating a plan. The other officers are advocating for waiting for K-9s. They know there's armed intruders inside. And Mom's saying, my babies are in that garage. The garage door is 15 feet away and it's open. Deputy Fulford says, the kids are in there. If the suspects hit the button and close the door, we're going to be in big trouble. So she goes in by herself. She comes in on one side of the van as the first suspect comes out on the other side. He starts engaging officers out in the street and realizes Deputy Fulford's on the other side of the van. So he starts engaging her, and she returns fire. They're exchanging fire. Suspect number 2 comes out on the other side of the van. So now she goes and she's transitioning. She's in a gunfight with 2 suspects on 2 sides of the van. She's engaging one, going behind cover, engaging the other. She runs through her first magazine, tactically reloads, goes back out, engages the first suspect. In that volley of fire, she's hit several times. She lands a headshot. He goes down dead. As she gets behind cover, she realizes she's hit in her gun hand, so she transitions to her offhand, goes back out and engages suspect number 2 in a volley of fire. In that volley of fire, she drops him with a headshot. He stumbles out and is fatally injured as well. The other officers come in. They drag Deputy Fulford out, get the kids out. She was shot 10 times. Full recovery, survived, went back on the job. What she said as a 3-year patrol officer, what saved her life that day, is she had just done a training where they had made her go through the entire day with a tennis ball in her shooting hand and doing everything in her offhand. Shooting, reloading, malfunctioning, everything in her offhand. Are we doing that? Are we that good? That's what kept her alive that day. And in the end, she married a firefighter, won the ultimate prize. And that's a true story. That's a true story. So that's all I have for you guys today. Get out there, get training, and be exceptional. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Byer with MSA. Today I'm going to be showing the Carnes XF1 helmet. This is a new Euro style / jet style helmet that we're bringing to the U.S. fire service market fourth quarter of this year. With this helmet, you're going to have a balanced fit with a 6-point adjustment on the inside. You're also going to have integrated electronics, integrated comms as an option, the dual face and eye protection. New style from Carnes with the same Carnes technology. For more information, check out msasafety.com.